So I'm Mike Conover. I'm a staff data scientist at LinkedIn, where I work in the machine learning research and development group to build intelligent technologies that help the world's professionals connect with opportunity. And as part of my work, I spend a lot of time thinking about networks and the structure of complex graphs and how information flows through networks. And so in the course of today's talk, I want to think a little bit about the character of information and the role that it plays in the modern world, and specifically take an eye on how data interplays with interplays with the networks that we coexist in with one another as part of the professional world. And so a history of information is appropriate here, and I think we can look back over the course of these structural changes in how information spreads over the surface of the planet in terms of eras governed by decreasing marginal costs in the transmission, storage, and reproduction of information. And so the beginning of this story is the free press. And so the free press precipitated a major decline in the marginal cost of reproducing information. You no longer had to pay somebody to transcribe a document. The thing about the printed word is that it's what economists would call a rival good. That is, you and I can't consume the same book at the same time. We're rivals for that product. And the cost of transmission is relatively high. You have to carry physical goods over the planet. It's not really that convenient. And so this era of the structural forces governing the transmission of information lasted for several hundred years until the advent of broadcast media. And so when we talk about broadcast media, we're thinking about satellites and radio generally. And so here now, we have the marginal cost of each additional consumer going to zero. To bring a new radio receiver online does not at all affect the signal strength of a broadcast tower. And so now we have a hub and spoke model of communication. The problem here, though, is that you need access to capital to own a satellite or a radio transmitter. This era persisted for about 100 years and was supplanted with the advent of the networked information economy, in which the marginal cost of being a producer of information approached zero. So this is to say, with the advent of low-cost ubiquitous computing technology, anybody could participate in a network of information transmission. And so this is one of these fundamental paradigm shifts that we're now beginning to see the effects accrue on the back of. And I think the role of data in this space is something somewhat special. Data allows us to measure for very low marginal cost phenomena which have been historically prohibitively expensive to instrument. And so what I mean by this is the following. If I wanted to study deforestation in the Amazon, even just 50 years ago, I would have to send a team of men with machetes and anti-malaria drugs into the jungle. Now I can bid on imaging time through an auction network of geostationary satellites and get near-line photographs of the area of interest in multiple spectra. And so this is substantially cheaper. If we think about fitness trackers, the reason that this data is interesting is because it's correlated with outcomes we care about. And these fitness trackers, they give you galvanic skin response, they let you look at heart rate, they let you look at the number of steps you've taken. These are not themselves measures of health, but rather they're correlates of health. And so this gives us a high-resolution signal on features about the world that we tend to care about. A person's fitness tracker is of interest to them, but what I'm interested in is the structure of these processes as they unfold at a societal scale. And so we can think about epidemiology as the study of health in the aggregate. My background's in a field called complex systems analysis, and a complex system is one whose behavior in the aggregate is different than the behavior of the individual components of that system. And we see complexity manifest in all manner of natural phenomena, in the swarming dynamics of large flocks of birds or schools of fish, in the fractal structure of plants, in the hierarchical complexity of cells which form tissues, which form organs, which form people and animals. This macroscopic structure, which is not characteristic of any one cell or any one agent, is what we talk about when we talk about complexity. And what's interesting here is that these properties that manifest in natural systems also manifest in human systems. And so these dynamics, which are characteristic of social insects, for example, also characterize the systems to which we are party, but into which we have limited visibility. And so think about traffic or the economy. These are systems operating at a global scale that have a major influence on the course of our lives, but into whose structure we have very limited perspective because we are geospatially and, in some respects, intellectually constrained. We can only perceive so much at once. If you've ever been part of a large crowd at a concert or at a protest, you can get caught up in swells of humans that operate on a scale that's somewhat outside of your control. And so what's interesting about data is that it lets us take this faraway perspective on social phenomena and allows us to observe society in the way that we might observe that flock of birds. And so you should be familiar with a process known as Stigma G, which is the means by which social insects imbue their environment with pheromones, chemical traces, which precipitate actions in other agents in the system. And this is the process which gives rise to the complexity of termite mounds and of beehives. We talk about Stigma G, it comes from the Greek stigma, to mark, and ergon, to work, to mark your work, as the essential process of coordination in these social colonies. What data allows us to do is effectively or metaphorically observe the pheromone trail of human society. We can look at the GPS signals coming off of cars. We can look at your connectivity patterns in the professional world. We can look at health. We can look at all of these things that are high-resolution correlates of quantities that we care about and observe the human colony from this faraway perspective. And so the reason that this is interesting is because human society, in fact, does have significant and sophisticated complexity at all scales. And we think about, here we have a picture of Berlin, a satellite photo of Berlin, and here we on the left we have a slime mold. These two different processes are solving a similar problem. The distribution of material resources over an effectively flat surface. And we see this pattern manifest at very different scales of reality. And so I think the study of the organization through the lens of systematic hierarchical complexity is very revealing. And it's no accident, then, that organism and organizations share a common etymology in the word to organize. And we have a science of organisms. We talk about biology and biochemistry. And we've seen tremendous dividends accrue to humanity on the back of our deepening understanding of the system-level structure and dynamics of the cell. The question I pose to you is this: what is possible? Oh, close. What's possible when we understand the structure of the economy in the same level of detail as we understand the structure of the cell? And so this is what when we talk about this research program at LinkedIn, we use a shorthand that we call the economic graph. And so this is a means of referring to the collected data assets that we've accrued in service of connecting the world's professionals with opportunity that represent the people, organizations, the relationship between individuals, the knowledge, the skills and education you need to get the job that you want. All of these things are characterized by relationships. And so if we know that system-level complexity and macroscopic structures in these systems arise as a result of the interactions between the constituents of those systems, it makes sense to look at the relationships and to study this through a network perspective. And so to make this a little more tangible, I'd like to share with you some of the research we've been involved with on these system-level properties to make this somewhat more concrete. So here we have the network of talent flows on a global scale. And what this is this is really cool, is what it is. So we see this sophisticated structure emerging from the migration of people across industries and across geospatial distance. Each point here is a company. And we draw a line between two companies whose width corresponds to the number of people on a global basis moving between those two organizations. And so we can cluster, we can define this network of talent flows, and we can cluster this graph to reveal community structure in this network. And if we look at just one of these communities, this blue community, we find that the companies represented therein are in the finance industry, the banking sector at a global scale. If we drill in further, we see that there is yet again hierarchical modularity. There is hierarchical cluster structure here, and we see that the geospatial structure of the global banking industry is revealed. We have European finance and Asian finance and American finance. And if we drill in just to this green community, we see that the different market components of the American finance network are revealed. We have private equity and venture capital and investment banking. And so we see that there is this nested structure, this hierarchical structure, similar to what we observe in the modular structure of cells and organisms in the global economy. And we can begin to understand through this lens the structure of micro-industries as they evolve in time, the gambling industry in Las Vegas, venture capital in Denmark, the auto industry in Detroit. And we can ask questions looking at these graphs as they evolve in time. For example, is this micro-industry going to grow or shrink in the next year based on influxes of talent? This is one perspective on the economic graph. We can go yet another layer deeper and look at individual companies. Here we have the network of relationships between employees of a publicly traded company. And what we see is that we have modular structure in this graph that reveals the functional structure of the organization itself, arising simply by virtue of the interactions between these employees. And we can study, for example, what are the structural properties of a business that lead to productive economic outcomes? Are there organizational structures that are troubled from the start, that are too centralized? Who are the gatekeepers? Who are the key players in this organization? This, again, is an example of networks nested within networks, and this modular hierarchical structure, which has community structure, which is governed both by topical area of focus and also geospatial constraints. And so I want to take a step back and talk a little bit more about the principal components of these graphs that you can leverage to help navigate more effectively your professional world and to grow and strengthen your own professional network. Because these insights they're concrete things that you can do to be a more effective networker. And I think that this understanding gives us some perspective on those problems. So if we think about, at a fundamental level, what a social network is, I would posit the following. Any social network, whether Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn, is a low-cost mechanism for maintaining weak social ties over very long periods of time. And you might say to me, well, why do I care about weak ties? These people that I rarely interact with, these are flimsy relationships at best. And I would say to you that the best-of-class social science research indicates that new information accrues across these weak connections. And so if you think on average that your coworkers are more or less exposed to the same information that you are because you're all talking to each other all the time, it is not from your coworkers which new opportunities flow to you. It's over coffee with a friend you haven't seen in a couple months. You say, let's catch up. And that's where you learn things that are new. It's these weak ties that are the conduits of information. This modularity, I mean, if you look at this not only looks like the structure of an industry where we have an industry and then we have industry sectors and we have micro-industries and then we have individual organizations within those communities. There's this hierarchical complexity as we see in organisms. This also looks like an org chart at a business. Teams are a natural way of compartmentalizing decision-making and propagating just the relevant information across these boundaries between teams, between departments, between sub-organizations within a business. Being aware of how this modularity plays out in these graphs is especially important when thinking about how to move through this network. And you see this from a very constrained local perspective in your own graph. So here we have, this is a service called InMaps that LinkedIn provided for many years that would let you see your first-degree connections and the connections among those people. And so here we have the first-degree network of a LinkedIn employee and his connections. And what we see here is that we have a language for this. We call these social circles. I travel in different spheres, and I know different communities of people who have something in common, college classmates, former coworkers, even coworkers working in 2 different units of the business. The thing to do in your life is to think about the different spheres in which you travel. And we see that these are largely disconnected. And that this coworker, this LinkedIn employee, it's not actually me, is the nexus through which these communities are connected. In your own life, try to cultivate bridging capital and think about how you can create opportunity for the people around you by being a conduit through which information flows. And so cultivate relationships at every scale of this hierarchy with multiple distinct communities. And moreover, don't over-index on people who are already like you, but instead think about how to diversify your network so that you are connected. If you work in data, think about relationships with people in design. Think about relationships with people in systems engineering. If you work in the tech industry, think about cultivating relationships with people in the arts and humanities. Because serendipity is, as Alistair was saying, this is one of these hard problems. Computers are always going to have a difficult time telling you what you didn't even know you wanted to know. And so humans are especially adept at making introductions and creating opportunity for the people around them. And so this is useful because in being an agent of opportunity, you stay top of mind and you maintain those weak connections. And you're also positioning yourself as somebody who's useful to know. And information and all manner of dividends accrue on the back of this kind of positioning. And so, sort of as a bookend here to some of this thinking, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I use LinkedIn to navigate this graph. And so LinkedIn is not a resume repository. It is a power tool for understanding the structure of these networks and giving you, it provides visibility into the extended structure of the economic graph beyond your locally constrained perspective. And I want to walk you through a simple use case of how I use the platform to more ably navigate this graph. So, first, the foundation is a warm network. You have to cultivate relationships with the people that matter to you. And any social networking platform, LinkedIn included, is an excellent mechanism to do this. Somebody's mentioned in the news. You can reach out and say, hey, I thought what you said in that article was really thoughtful. Somebody has a new job. You can say, let's catch up over lunch. I think it would be wonderful to hear about the things that you're thinking about at this new company. This is a mechanism to maintain those relationships. And so you have to build on a foundation of a warm network. Once you have that, you can identify opportunities. And so let's say for this little case study that I want to know more about how people are thinking about things at Uber. I go to the company page here, and I see that I have 7 first-degree connections. I can see what my network distance to this company is. I can see that I have 7 first-degree connections, that I'm connected to about 15% of the employees at degree 2. So I have a warm introduction to about 15% of the company. I like those odds. And so what I can do is I can click through to see how I'm connected in a more detailed way. And here I have the search interface that shows me, okay, here are my second degree connections. We have an angel investor, we have the CEO. This person at the bottom is particularly interesting. Ed Baker is the head of growth at Uber. And I work on building new products, and I think about growth a lot. I'd like to know, they've clearly had a lot of success in this domain. I'd like to know more about how they're driving their growth strategy. I want to connect with Ed. And so what I do is I go to his profile. And in addition to all of the table stakes stuff, like where he's worked, the skills that he has, his educational background, there is surprisingly useful information stored in the people also viewed module and how your connections to this individual. So people also viewed, effectively, if you look at these names, the people, when I look at 2 profiles, we know that these people are viewed together, and we surface that information. And what happens here is that you have a picture of his network orbit. The crowd is voting in a decentralized way to say, these 2 individuals have something in common for some reason, whether it's recruiting or sales or, I just know both of these people, and so I tend to look at their profiles together. The community looks at these 2 individuals often in the same context. And so what you see is that Ed's network neighborhood, I think he has Travis, the CEO, VP of Strategic Initiatives, the head of product, growth team at Uber. These people are the individuals that Ed is probably interacting with on a regular basis. And so you can use this functionality, you can click through these profiles to move through this organizational network and understand how the connections between these individuals are actually made within this organization. And so, given this information, I can find new individuals that I might want to contact, or I can choose to reach out to Ed himself. And so, what I can see is who are my second degree or my first degree connections that can make a warm introduction to Ed. I can see how they know him, and I can think about who's going to provide the best connection, where both relationships are somewhat credible and have a lot of mutual trust to this individual. But in the event that I want to reach out on my own, I think the thing to do, here's what I do. I think about how I can create opportunity for everybody involved. And so I reach out, I say, hey, Ed, I know that there would be a lot of interest from the team in the work that you're doing. If you'd ever like to stop by the campus for an informal tech talk, I'd love to host. Shoot me a line. I'll make all the arrangements. And what I've done here is played the role of bridging actor. I've connected Ed with an audience of capable, intelligent engineers. And I've connected my colleagues with a thought leader in the space of growing, hyper-growth companies and product development. And so by positioning myself between these two communities, and not in a self-serving way, but in a way that tries to create value for everybody involved, virtuous dividends accrue on the back of this, and they're impossible to forecast, but it's a structurally advantageous thing to do. And so this is a little bit about how I think about the structure of these networks and the sort of beautiful complexity that we see manifest in data. And it's not simply an exercise in awe, though there is something about the shimmering collective action of a flock of birds that is also present in our collective dynamics, but there are specific actionable insights that you can use in your own life, and that we're beginning to understand in a very structural and very principled scientific way by studying these graphs. And we have just begun the undertaking of tapping this knowledge to help connect the world's professionals with opportunity. And so I thank you for your time, and appreciate it so much.